Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I want to start out by saying I've sat on natural resources in the Assembly. I sat on EQ in the Assembly, and I was there for this first scoping period of meeting with Mary Nichols, with Senator Waso, or Senator Chesborough and myself, and I asked for why don't we calculate or we assess what the impacts of carbon are from wildfire. And the answer was that it's a natural occurrence, and we really so they haven't counted carbon or even assessed how much carbon we're releasing due to wildfire. So fast forward a few years, and we did SB 901. In SB 901, we actually put language in that bill that said to ARB that you will assess the amount of carbon that is released from forest fire. Now, mind you, what has happened in our ecosystem? Before we settled here in this, fire naturally burned in California, our landscapes, in most places every 10 years, in some places more often, in some places not so often. But what did that do? The fire basically thinned our forest lands and our brush lands and gave us an ecosystem that was balanced. We came along, and what did we do? We suppressed fire for almost 100 years now. So our forest and our rangelands are not in the same place they were before we came along and settled this land and started managing our land. So the ecosystem is out of balance. And quite frankly, we've seen catastrophic wildfires and fires that are so devastating that it's because there's too much fuel load out there. And what happens when we have all this fuel load? We have too many trees per acre, and this is the other thing I want to mention too, is the Sierras, the Cascades, the Trinity Alps, the coastlines are carbon sequesters. We all learned in 5th grade that when we breathed out carbon monoxide, the trees breathe it in and they filter it. It's the biggest filter system in California, and it is impaired. And I am somewhat frustrated. I've read the analysis on this bill, and nobody wants to tackle the big issues in California. When we have too many trees per acre, when the snow actually falls, it doesn't touch the ground because it lands on the branches of the trees. And that causes evapotranspiration. That means when the wind blows, it evaporates and it goes away. It doesn't land on the forest floor because it's too thick. And we've seen catastrophic wildfire where we've lost millions of acres, millions, 4.2 million acres. When you think about how much land that is and what devastating is, and we don't count the carbon, we don't talk about the carbon. Now, we regulate carbon that comes from diesel trucks, agricultural equipment, boats, ships, trains, and we try to manage the system, but we don't talk about the system that is really impacting the environment. Black carbon and the environmental devastation from fire is something that needs to be put into the scoping plan. This bill does not ask for any money from GGRF funds. I stripped it all out. This bill simply asks the ARB to calculate the emissions from fires. That's what this bill does. And for the life of me, I've tried everything, and I'm passionate about this. If you come to the forest and let the forest talk to you and see what happens out there, there's no way, as somebody who cares about the environment, cannot do something about it. It's the elephant in the room that nobody seems to want to address. So I get opposition. Maybe it's just the name on the bill. I get opposition from the Sierra Club on almost every single bill I run here. I've invited them to come out and look at the forest with me and the lands that are impaired. I've ran many bills in the area of doing streamlining regulations so we can actually go out and thin the forest, so we can allow fire to do what it naturally did, which was burn in a low-intense mosaic way. So members, I know I got opposition. I know this bill's tough, and I know I probably won't get this bill out of here. But I'm not going to give up on this because it's righteous. It is very righteous. And I consider myself an environmentalist. I till the land. I take care of the land. And this forest is our land. And our watersheds and our wildlife are suffering because we don't address it in the right way. I just simply want to push the point that we are releasing carbon, millions of tons, and I can pull out of the analysis that's in there if you read it, how many metric million tons was emitted just in the last cycle. So I ask for an aye vote on this bill. I know it's tough, and if you have suggestions, and if you have more data than I can, and questions for me to answer, I would love to answer those bills or those questions so that I can explain the flawed analysis I got. When you talk about, yes, trees, limbs fall to the ground and they become, some of it comes to be petrified wood. That's stored carbon forever. That's exactly right. But we have to get our forest back in the shape, and we can't do that until we acknowledge that we have a serious problem there with carbon output. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Dahle. Let's go to the phone lines. If anyone wants to voice opposition, voice support for the bill. We don't have registered witnesses on either side.
So support for, I think we're on SB 495. Is that correct, Mr.
Yeah, this is 495, moderator.
Thank you. And to show support for this bill, please press 1 followed by 0 at this time. Mr. Chair, nobody is queuing up.
Anyone in opposition?
To show opposition for SB 495, please press 1 followed by 0. And again, nobody is queuing up at this time, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay. So back to the committee. Look, I want to say, first of all, let me just start by saying my appreciation for the author and his always committed approach to asking tough questions and really asking tough questions of our entire approach to big problems of all sorts, and especially in the area of wildfire. And I'm personally very happy to go up with you to the forest and kind of walk a mile in your shoes up there. You know, there's no question that we're losing ground in our effort to combat climate change. We're having ever more catastrophic wildfires. Just yesterday, I was on a call with a bunch of USC students who've been helping me think about wildfire challenges. And we talked about how this is the new normal. I mean, I think for a long time we've just kind of, we always knew there was this fire challenge, this liability, this danger, this vulnerability. But it was the kind of thing that would happen occasionally. And now it's just become a kind of an annual occurrence that not only in your neck of the woods, but in my neck of the woods and in the Bay Area, here in Sacramento, we've got lights flickering out in the middle of the day because the smoke from the wildfires has gotten to be so intense, and the smoke that we're all breathing in has gotten to be so intense. And so it's an enormous problem. Now, I don't think it's fair to say that we're just not doing anything about it. I mean, I think it's taken us too long. But obviously, we just passed a major wildfire package for funding to address wildfire mitigation. This is, of course, an important part of the bond discussion with SB 54. There's a lot in there about wildfires, and just a lot of kind of further commitment. I mean, even this latest package that we did, I think, is just the start of what is certainly going to be more and more resource and attention and time given by everyone from the governor through the legislature to the top agencies to start dealing with this enormous problem that you're absolutely right to talk about and point out and try to get us to focus on. My issue, and I think our committee issue with the bill really has more to do with the approach. The question about how the extent to which we can parse out the complex interactions between natural carbon cycles and human activity and GHG emissions resulting from natural lands. And I guess the question that is going to continually come up for us is how we can call for and importantly plan for GHG reductions from natural processes in the scoping plan before we know how to differentiate between natural processes and those emitting carbon as a result of human activity. We may know what ignites a fire, for example, but how do we determine how much GHG from any given fire is natural and to be expected? What is the normal baseline that we've deviated from? Obviously, wildfires have always been an emitter from long before, the era of the Spanish. There is a natural process associated with fire. It's an important part of our ecosystem here in California. Of course, you point out, and everyone knows that human interaction, human engagement, our transmission lines, the further development into the WUI have exacerbated the situation and put us in a place where now we really have to start to grapple with wildfires as a human-caused polluter, in addition to public health threat. So now, of course, wildfire severity varies from year to year, and there's some questions about how we plan for emission reductions from fire when we can't anticipate how severe a season will be. Of course, they seem to be getting more and more severe. We know that limiting all fire was not the correct forest management approach, but without knowing an appropriate wildfire emissions baseline and with statutory direction to maximally reduce emissions, that could be just what we're back to doing. So, from my perspective, studying this issue is a better approach. It allows us to figure out our wildfire emission goals before potentially setting back our climate goals writ large. And that's, of course, another huge part of this effort. Part of California's thought process here is that we do want to continue to be a leader, in focusing on emissions reduction in those areas that really are entirely, human caused. I guess, so SB 32 requires California to get 40% 1990 emission levels by 2030. And one of the questions is, well, should our wildfire emissions be 40% lower than they were in 1990? Is that how we should be thinking about it? I don't know that it is. So I'm very sympathetic to the author's intent. I agree we need to take aggressive steps to reduce the severity and the prevalence of wildfires in our state. I'm a joint author of the Senate's Climate and Wildfire Bond, SB 45. I was very supportive of the wildfire package. I'm on the wildfire team. I'm very interested in working with the author, on how to make sure that we continue, not just continue to, but really shine a greater spotlight on the challenges and needs, both from a public health perspective and a forest management perspective, but also on a climate perspective when it comes to addressing wildfires. I just don't personally feel comfortable with this particular approach. But I do want to say how I do sincerely appreciate the author's sincerity and honesty and commitment to addressing this issue. I'm not comfortable supporting this particular approach today. But certainly want to work with him in the future. And obviously, if he has the votes, he has the votes. But I certainly want to work with him in the future on what is an undeniable major challenge that our state faces. And so with that, happy to open up the floor to questions, comments, discussion from the members. Senator Gonzalez.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Dahle. I understand. I know you've brought this issue up as well, and I had the opportunity when I first got in 2019 to go with Senator Nielsen up to Paradise to see his community. And so I understand, I've seen it. I don't understand fully, but I've seen it directly. And it's something that I know you'll continue working on and we want to help you with sincerely. I think I'm with the chair in that it is the approach for me as well. And the last portion of the committee's analysis, kind of states it all and kind of wraps it up in terms of a study to investigate and project human caused versus naturally caused. And I don't want to continue to belabor the point, but I think we need to start there first in order to get some understanding on where we need to pivot from here. So with that, I'll be laying off today, but I look forward to working with you on this sincerely as well. Thank you.
Senator Skinner?
So apologies, but I had to be down in housing. I'm just curious from the author, because I didn't get to hear it and you may have said it, why, I thought the analysis was very compelling. What makes you uncomfortable about taking the committee's amendments?
Well, I did somewhat maybe address it in my opening remarks. So I asked 5 years ago when Senator Chesborough was the chair of Natural Resources and I was the vice chair that we scoped it, put this in the scoping plan for ARB. Never happened. I actually was very key in SB 901 when I was in the Assembly side. It was the actually Republican leader, and just Senator or Assemblymember Wood and I held out until we got the language put in that bill to actually do it. And it's in there, but it's not quantifying just fire. So the report I got back is a convoluted report. It talks about, and so basically I have not given up on this. I think it's a righteous thing to do. I think we should count forest fire. I'm not asking us to fund something. I'm not asking for us to take any RRG, GRF monies. I stripped all that out of the bill. Do I think we should spend more resources there? Absolutely. And we didn't get that done. We did do that in 901. We put resources in there. But simply, the fact is that when you talk about human cause and natural, I know that Senator Allen and Senator Skinner have been on the forestry tours and been out there to see on the ground. And I know that Senator Gonzalez is hopefully coming with me soon. We caused the problem. That's the point. When you talk about human cause, yes, there's different types of ignition that happen by humans, which is either transmission lines or vehicles or arson. But the resource itself has been manipulated for over the last 100 years by man. It's not in its natural state. So when if we want to have the debate about what the resource, how much emissions are going to come off, what would be naturally stored, where's that baseline, which is I think what Senator Allen's talking about. That's why he wants to do a study. We asked them to do that, and that's what they gave me. If you look at the report that comes from ARB, it's pretty benign and pretty general, and doesn't talk about what the human interaction with the land has been. So the reason for this bill is to say that we put it in this position. There's no doubt about it. Look, I'm not denying that the climate's warming, but we caused there's too much fuel. Whether it's in trees or brush, there's too much fuels, and we need to put it back in a state where fire can actually go into the landscape and be left alone and do what it's supposed to do, which is mosaically burn through the forest. And we have all kinds of data that shows us what it was like before we messed with it, before we either cut it down and let it grow back and then stopped all the fire, or whatever happened in the past. But I can tell you what did happen in the past was we've manipulated it. So that's the reason behind this bill, is to just get that quantity to talk about, hey, look at what we're doing on fire. And I ran a bill to do the analysis for wildlife. That bill's actually working through the process, which I know it will probably get held up in the approps because it's going to take some money, because I want to know what the analysis. So I've been working on this watershed carbon approach to wildlife, to our water sequestration in the forest, and to the carbon output. So those are the three legs of what I think should happen. And we debate all day long about how we should spend the money and where the right places are. But I think the differences between my philosophy and some others is how we get there. We can regulate the heck out of industry because we have a source. We know right where it's coming from, and we know that we've actually taken carbon out of the ground and we're emitting it. No debate. But in this case, we've stored more carbon, and now we're having massive releases of it. So how do we actually manage that in a way that we don't have these massive releases, and we actually go in and do the right thing, which is thin the darn forest, and then let fire do what it does. And I've championed bill after bill to try to get there, and I always have opposition from this person that doesn't want to cut a tree, and that person and it's like, the level of frustration is very high, as you can see. So I hope I answered your question.
The only thing that I was really, and I know I appreciate your explanation, I just was trying to understand why, it seemed to me that while the amendments did not achieve all of your goals, that it did move the ball forward and would provide you with some of the information you wanted, not perhaps in the way you had hoped. But that's why I wondered why you are not willing to take all the committee's amendments, because I could support the bill with the committee's amendments.
Yeah.
Well, I would just say that it's kind of like Senator Waso's bill was kind of in the same situation. If you water my bill down to where it doesn't do what I want to get it to done, then I might as well, do a better job of educating, I guess. I would be happy to share with the whole committee what the ARB puts out right now as far as what they consider their scoping plan. And if you read it, I hope you're just as disappointed as I am in the results that we're getting. So anyway.
Senator Stern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Dahle, for your consistent passion and advocacy here. I've been through these dialogues with you privately and publicly for years now. My concern is that the implication is that somehow we're ignoring the carbon intensity of wildfires, and that's the problem with this bill here. I think the insistence on trying to add emissions to the scoping plan itself, which is about anthropogenic human-caused emissions, for which we have a 40% requirement to go below 1990 levels by 2030, and a regulatory compliance framework where cars and trucks and power plants and factories are actually regulated for those emissions in the scoping plan. To put a tree and say that we have to now regulate a tree like we regulate cars is,
Right.
I think you might even admit, seems like an awkward fit. So, if we were going to add these non-anthropogenic sources, these sort of these nature-based sources to our scoping plan, say it's about double the emissions of what we've got in there right now. You've now just reduced the compliance burden on the rest of the state by half. So you've told petroleum, which is the largest source of emissions in the state, you know what? Cut your obligation in half. Let's not worry about petroleum. We can hit the 40% below 1990 levels just by adding this forest carbon in and doing some forest management. If there's a way to build these emissions in so that you're not letting everyone else off the hook for a very carefully negotiated agreement around our climate policies in this state that was negotiated on a bipartisan basis and has a huge industry behind it, and it's a lot to just throw in a whole source that is a nature-based source. That's the confounding part here. I think if you had either a requirement to increase the actual emissions target by 2030, which I know you didn't vote for our legislation that would have done that, SB 582, but that 80% target would allow for space for this kind of forestry-based carbon. Or if we were able to go more Senator Skinner's route in her SB 27, where she's also trying to get an accurate inventory and really get the math done behind natural and working lands, but not trying to treat that as a market-based compliance mechanism for the rest of the man-made emissions. Then you wouldn't have the concern that people living in Long Beach on the 710 corridor or who are suffering from pollution in the Central Valley are suddenly going to have to suffer just as much, if not more, pollution because, we started counting forests and that offsets all that other pollution. So I think it might be, it's probably too late to add that kind of amendment of an 80% target to your bill or to try to take these emissions and put them where I think they belong, which is in a natural and working lands framework that the Resources Agency could look at. If you're open to that, I think we really could have something here, and maybe not today, but maybe this session to put that all together. But it's too narrow to simply say, no, we're trying to ignore those emissions, and you're not paying attention to this ARB. ARB is paying attention to the challenge we set before them, which is to get to 40% below 1990 of anthropogenic emissions in the state of California. If we want to add double that, then let's double our commitment. So I'm up for, if you want to add that to the bill, I'd be glad to support it, or to take the committee amendments. I'm glad to support that. But I think we've got to just have an apples to apples kind of conversation about all this here.
I'd love to respond to that. First of all, I thank you for your thoughtful analysis, but I just want to make one comment. The climate doesn't matter whether you bring the carbon out of the ground or you emit it somewhere. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you still have a carbon problem. Whether you have a source for funding or not, a source where you want to let somebody off the hook or not, at the end of the day, I thought it was really interesting that the EPA director said he was with the governor in San Francisco and the sky was orange. It wasn't from cars. It was from the forest burning the heck down. So, look, I know I'm not going to get this bill out here today, but I challenge you. I challenge every member in this legislature to help me figure out a way that we can actually do the work that needs to be done. Because if you truly care about the darn climate and you really watch our watersheds get destroyed, and it's beyond my comprehension that we focus on some of the things that are, and there's this giant output. It's like, for me, it's like, doesn't make sense. And as I said earlier, I've ran bills to try to direct the regulatory processes in the forest to get us to do it on with its own payment schedule. But I just would say that, and the other thing that I want to add is that the federal government is not at the table, which is very frustrating. They have 60% of the land mass in California is owned by the federal government, which is our watershed, our wildlife, and they're not at the table at all. And you know, I went off on Trump's saying when he said, you know, California's problems are because California doesn't do the right thing and tried to blame Governor Newsom. No, buddy, you represent 60% of it and you're not managing your land at all, and it's disgusting.
Yeah, well, we're hoping that the federal government will come to the table. The item moved by Senator Bates, we'll take that as your close. Appreciate, and I will say challenge accepted in terms of partnership and working together on this issue. So consultant, please call the roll.
Item number 9, SB 495 by Senator Dahle. The motion is due pass, but first be re-referred to the Committee on Governance and Finance. Allen. Bates.
Aye.
Bates, aye. Dahle.
Aye.
Dahle, aye. Gonzalez. Skinner. Stern.
Stern not voting.
Stern not voting. Wajkowski.
Okay, we'll close the roll on that.